Today I'm going to talk to you about a project on conserving, from the wild Otways, conserving threatened mammals in the Otways Ranges. I'm sorry, I'm just shifting this across. And I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors, Mark Garkakos, Phoebe Burns from Zoos Victoria, who spoke in the last session, and John White from Deakin University. The Wild Otways project on threatened mammals has several major objectives. First of all, it's the maintenance or improvement of threatened mammal species across the Otways. And to do that, we are first of all collating all the historical and recent small mammal data that is available for those threatened species. The second part of that objective is to undertake surveys to fill in the knowledge gaps of any of these species occurrence. The second major objective is the maintenance or improvement of threatened species refuges. And to do that, we're going to be looking at locating and finding the extent of the refuges for these species across the Otways. And we're going to be characterising the small mammal refuge areas. So a bit of background as to why we need to do this across the Otways. In the eastern Otways, we had some very healthy mammal communities, and our work at Deakin between 1975 and 2007 found or documented many of these very healthy communities. And we were more interested in what the species were like, what their ecology was like, how they reproduced, what their populations were like. And two threatened species that we concentrated on were New Holland mouse, which is a native rodent, which Phoebe's talked a little bit about, and the swamp antechinus, which is a dasyurid marsupial. And over this period of time, New Holland mouse were found at about 17 sites located in this area and this area. And they occur in woodlands, which are forests, woodlands and forests, which are species rich. They had some very good high density populations, and we were able to show that they increased in population density after high rainfall, but they were precipitously declined during drought. The swamp antechinus were located over about 30 sites. I've highlighted some of the green areas here, and they occur in damp, dense heaths, wet heaths, tussock areas, and on these sand dune areas here. We also had information about those populations increasing when there was high rainfall, but decreasing when there was less than average rainfall, and also that this species was very susceptible, and many populations was extirpated after wildfire. As far as the other species occurred, we had very healthy populations of agile antechinus, white-footed dunner, bush rat, swamp rat, and they occurred at higher site occupancy. When we started to revisit these sites in recent times, between 2013 and 2020, we found a very significant decline in small mammals. It was somewhat unexpected. We knew that there were declines in the New Holland mouse because we hadn't captured any since 2002. And as I said, they declined precipitously after those drought events. However, we had no idea that similar, and so we think New Holland mouse is like the canary in the coal mine here. Swamp antechinus, we didn't realise that they had also gone under declines, and we only captured 8 individuals between 2013 and 15, and none in 2016 and 17. Furthermore, in the woodlands, the low forests, the sandy heathlands, and the headland scrub, we had very low mammal abundance. 67% of the sites had experienced large and severe declines, where they'd been previously high abundance and high species richness. There was only really one good point coming out, we did find in the coastal dunes and gullies higher abundance and species richness of our mammals, including the presence of some of these swamp antechinus remnant populations. So this signified to us that these were important mammal refuges, and we needed to find out where they were. So what is the characteristic of these refuges? Well, they're mainly areas that have dense and high cover of vegetation. They're maintaining moisture, and so they're providing protection, which other people have talked about today, protection for mammals from predators. The coastal dunes, this is showing the major section of the coastal dunes between Anglesey and Urquharts Bluff, also have high nutrients, and we have measured these, and they appear to be coming from marine inputs. And so that nutrient level is good for reproduction for the mammals. They're optimal. We've found swamp antechinus, bandicoots, potoroos, and high populations of rodents, even in the presence of predators, foxes and cats. And they obviously are providing protection for our mammal communities. We've worked with Parks Vic and DELP over the years to try and map or find out where these refuges occur so that we can inform the FFM and Parks Vic about which areas need protection. And in the Eastern Otways, this is just a preliminary map that we've kind of looked at. We've got our refuges in the sand dunes, examples of refuges up gullies. And we've also worked in the Carlisle Heath, and we found that there are a higher abundance of mammals and swamp antechinus in some of the poorly drained wet heaths. So we've just mapped some of these across the landscape. They're preliminary, but they've given us the basis for the new Otways, Wild Otways project. When we've started the project, we've collated all the historical and recent data on the small mammal records. As Julian said, the FFM have a very big database. We also harvested the government database, the VBA, which, as someone has mentioned, Dave mentioned, is not really up to date and misses very large areas of the data that's available. So we went to universities, the CEC, and individual researchers. We audited those data. Phoebe Burns helped us to order that data to ensure spatial accuracy and remove the duplicates or unreliable records. And we've been able to map all the known and historical records for the species, and we've stratified them across time. So just two examples. The left-hand side here is the southern brown bandicoot. Distributions, you can see that it's centered on the northern areas in heathy woodlands and some of the wetter heathlands down in the Carlisle area. On the right-hand side, the swamp antechinus, also in the heathlands and wetter heathlands, but also particularly along these coastal dunes at Cape Otway and along the coast in the Eastern Otways. Another example is the potoroo, which actually is much more widespread. So it's got records throughout the area, the Otways, and an important part of the Wild Otways will be to determine how we maintain the species distribution, and a lot of that work will come out of the CEC's Fox-Cat project. Having mapped all the distributions, we've started using gap filling and refuge surveys. So in 2021, having looked at those, we started to do some more survey work, filling in the gaps where work hasn't been done before. We haven't recorded any New Holland mouse so far. We have found southern brown bandicoots in candidate refuges, which is good. The live trapping success in the Eastern Otways did improve slightly from about less than 8% to 9.8%. However, it was only slightly. And our trapping has kind of supported our information about gullies remaining important refuges. In the Otways, across the whole Otways, we will need to do more gap-filling surveys, and Phoebe Burns spoke to you about her work as soon as she can get out in the field to look for broadtooth rat and smoky rat mouse. We'll be also looking at habitat from our habitat models for where New Holland mouse may still exist. We'll be improving our surveys of swamp antechinus, and we'll be looking at locations and extent of refuges. One of the gap-filling surveys that we've done in collaboration with Dr. John White and Kristen Agosta, who's doing her honours at Deakin, is looking at surveys in the Carlisle Heath. Our earlier data and the CEC data show that there are certainly swamp antechinus there, but we had no idea about the abundance or where they're occurring. Is there any difference between the populations in the Eastern Otways and the Carlisle Heath? So Kristen did some site selection based on the topography and the EVCs, and also our previous trapping, where we'd worked with Hamish and Mel Horwell and Mick Baker to look for refuges. She selected 40 sites, 20 in heathy woodlands, 60 in the wet heathlands, and 3 in combination sites, and one was ended up being in a riparian forest. They were located in the wet heathy woodlands. The wet heath you can see here down in the slope, and then up again in the heathy woodlands. So she did some surveys in April and June, and here's Kristen here. She worked extremely hard and has done a wonderful job. 10 species have been recorded, 8 native and 2 introduced. The trap success was very high, 19 capture rate of 19.2, indicating a high abundance of mammals in the area. Observations indicate that yes, upslope have lowest captures, and some very significant findings with high captures of swamp antechinus, and a very unusual finding that 19 females versus 58 males in this data set, and usually the population is 50-50, so there's something going on there. Possibly the males are running around at breeding time. Kristen's going to analyse in greater detail the relationships between the species she captured, the EVCs, the topography, and the fire age. So some very interesting work coming out there. Finally, in the Wild Otways Initiative, in this project, we will be drawing together all that knowledge over the recent years, both from our work and the CEC works, to share with the land managers and incorporate into specific management interventions for each of the species. They'll be incorporated into the Corangamite Regional Catchment Strategy. And as here, we're presenting our findings in conferences and symposia, so we can let people know what the actual situation is. And I just wanted to finalise this presentation, but if any of you have been watching the parliamentary inquiry into ecosystem declines in Victoria, you'll know what a serious situation we're in. And even though we are looking in this project at threatened mammals, it's the ecosystem that we need to be looking at across the Wild Otways project. And the climate change adaptation plan that is being reviewed at the moment emphasises something that we have to keep in our mind. A lot of the work that we're doing, the management, is about incremental adaptations. So we're managing with small adjustments, and that's suitable for gradual change. We need to think about transformational change, because that's what's happening with some of the changes that are occurring to mammals in the Otways, particularly in the Eastern Otways. We have reached some tipping points in some areas across the Otways, and we do need to think about very large changes in terms of management. So just keeping that in mind for the Wild Otways project. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thanks, Barb.